As you saw in the previous videos and as you read in your book, the Assyrians were an incredibly powerful empire in Mesopotamia. In the 7th century, the Assyrians come in, they conquer the Elamites, they conquer the Babylonians, and they set up this huge empire, building large citadels, each successive king building one throughout the empire. But not only were they fierce warriors and ruled with sort of an iron fist, the Assyrians, though, were also incredible artists and brought some of the most detailed and exquisite work from ancient Mesopotamia. We are looking here at a painting of a king named Ashurbanipal II with his attendants. He is here seen making an offering to a god or goddess. You can see he's holding a bowl or a cup with a libation. It is clear that he is the king because of the use of hieratic scale. He is larger than everybody else. Plus, if you look at his face over here in profile, you will see that his eye is shown in that composite view. His face is profile, but his eye is facing towards us. This is a strategy we have seen dating all the way back to the Paleolithic era, where you often see one part of a body shown from one viewpoint and another part shown from another viewpoint. This is that whole perceptual versus conceptual image. When we think of an eye, we think of an eye facing towards us. You don't think of your girlfriend or boyfriend's eye from the side, right? You don't think my girlfriend has really beautiful eyes from the side. No, when we picture an eye, we think of it straight forward. And so the Assyrians, like the Sumerians and the Babylonians, and dating all the way back to the Paleolithic era, use these strategies to depict the human face. So we see these eyes from the side. But if you look closely at the garments, you will see there's an increased amount of detail with the patterns on the king's robe, with detailing here on the sheaths of the swords. So what we are looking at is a progression from just sort of this kind of these stick figure forms, which we saw especially in ancient Sumerian art, to a much more detailed view of the world. This is a relief sculpture from the palace of a king, Ashurbanipal II, the same king we just saw. This is an image of a battle of, you can see on the left, the king's archers shooting at their enemies. The enemies tried to invade the king's fortress, but were then sent into the Euphrates River, where they struggled for survival. You can see that this figure down here is blowing up on an animal skin, using it as an inflation device, sort of like a life jacket, as they try to escape the arrows of their enemy. You'll notice that the sort of scale and the proportions here are off. The figures that are the focus of the image are enlarged, they're exaggerated, they're bigger than everything else. The archers who should be further away, though, on the banks of the river, are also shown quite large. The scale is wacky. And this is so we can see everything. The importance here is not creating a realistic image, but the main goal here is to tell a story. And so that means that the artists often took liberties with the sort of perceptual image of things. And we get, once again, a conceptual image, where in this case, the story, the narrative, dictates what is important. And so the most important things are the largest things, and they are out of scale with their environment. You can also see, while there is some realism in, certainly the bodies of the figures here, the way they are kneeling, the archers, holding their bows and arrows is quite realistic. If you look closely, for example, at the water, you can see we have water that looks more like a symbol for water. So what you're sort of looking at is selective, is a kind of a selective realism or a selective naturalism, right? Where um, where the stuff that's important, but not only that, the stuff that is helps tell the story has a realism and a detail to it that is not evident in sort of the background information. This is another relief sculpture of a later king, a later Assyrian king. We're looking 200 some odd years later, a king named Ashurbanipal. Ashurbanipal, like all Assyrian kings, was a hunter. This was a symbol of sort of their power over nature. But these were controlled hunts. These were hunts that took places in arenas with lions and other sort of fierce animals that had been collected and gathered and then were placed in this arena for the king to hunt. This was so it's really as much of sort of a sport as it is anything else. This is not hunting for food. This is hunting for pleasure and also hunting as a symbol of the power the king had over his environment. But this is fascinating to me because if you compare the way the artist depicted the humans compared with the way they depicted the animals, I think you will see a striking difference. If we look here at the king, Ashurbanipal, you can see that traditional composite figure. You see the eye on the side. You also see his head in profile, but a chest that is facing towards us. So basically two angles shown at once, a forward view and a sidewards view composited into one view. You can see that here also with his attendants who are holding back the lions with the spear. But if we zoom in on the animals, we see a realism that is not evident in the depiction of human beings. We see an interest in the anatomy and the musculature of the animals. You can see sort of the tendons and the veins underneath the skin. And if you look at this image, I think what we're looking at is something incredible. We are looking at an image of death, a real image of death. This isn't sort of a symbolic reference to death in the way that, say, the water in this image is a symbolic reference to water. What we are looking at is a real sort of anatomically, physiologically accurate depiction of a dying animal. Look at this lioness. We see that she has been wounded in the hunt. We see a series of arrows that have pierced her spine, leaving her back legs inoperable. She is now paralyzed from the waist down, and she drags these sad, sort of once powerful legs, allowing her to leap through the air, behind her. We can still see the details in the musculature, but we see almost a sort of mess of legs as they sort of fold over each other. But it is in the front, I think, that we see what is most remarkable about this image. We see her claws digging into the ground. We see these powerful forearms pressing against the earth, trying to keep her body aloft. And then if we look into her face, we see this incredible detail, the wrinkles of her nose as she growls and screams and rages against her oncoming death and the pain that she is feeling. And we don't see that sort of realism, that sort of naturalism in human beings in Assyria or really anywhere else in the ancient world. Well, certainly the Assyrians upped their game and brought in a new level of detail that had henceforth not been seen. We are still mostly kind of looking at symbols of human figures. For example, the king Ashurbanipal doesn't really look like a real person in his composite figure and his sort of blank face. We can same way with the enemies here. There is no emotion being conveyed through the depiction of their bodies. They are simply symbols, icons, representations of a person, but not a sort of an emotional equivalent thereof, right? Same way here. Symbols of people. This is a strategy that we will see a lot in the ancient world. This sort of use of this kind of realism in nature and a more kind of iconic or abstract view of humanity. It's almost like human beings were special, so they needed to be portrayed in a more abstract, iconic sort of way to sort of symbolize their difference, their separation from the natural world. Whereas animals are part of nature, and they come from nature. They are there to be conquered by us too, as all nature was considered to be by the kings and the people of this time. So we have a much more naturalistic and realistic view of animals.